Hi, my name is Gretchen Beatty, and today I'm going to tie what we call a poly humpy, and it's our version of the regular hair wing humpy that we do in the summer when we're busy and we want a quick fly. It floats like a cork, and it is quick, a good step for you to take before you start tying hair wings, and this is a number 14. So we'll start out with a 14 hook, any dry fly hook. And I'm also going to be using my magnifying glasses so that I can see, and I find I get a lot better quality of a fly when I do that. We're going to be just tying with a regular flat wax 6/0 thread today, and I will make the body out of the thread. This way you don't have to change materials, and it makes it real quick. You want to start your fly base wrap at the 1/3 point, and what that will do for you is that marks where you eventually want the wings to be seated. So we'll start right there, and we're doing two things. We're doing our base wrap, and we're marking the 1/3 point where we will eventually want the wings. We're going to wrap to the bend, and if you have trouble determining where the bend is, you hold your thread down. It's right where the barb is. Okay, now we'll come back. And instead of coming clear back to the 1/3 point like a lot of people do on humpies, I'm going to come back to about the 1/2 point. And the reason I do that is when I clip the tail, it's going to be at the 1/3 if I tie it on at the 1/2. So I'll show you how that works. Our tail today is moose hair, and since it's still kind of the heating season and we have lots of static in the air, be sure and spray static guard on yourself, your hair, and the stacker. A lot of people ask how you determine how much hair to use, and I'll show you how we do it. First of all, we want to get all of these little guard hairs out, and if you start pulling the hairs out with your fingers, you will generate static. So what we do is just gently run your finger through the hair, and it comes right out. And then a couple pulls, and you've got clean hair. Another thing is you've cut the hair off, and so these ends are all pretty even. So load your stacker from the end like this. Put the hair in the stacker, and if our static guard is working, a couple little taps, and always take the hair out with the tips pointed in the direction that you're going to tie them on the fly. The less you handle these tips, the more likely they are to stay stacked. We don't count the fibers in the hair fibers for our tails and wings, but the proportion is if you take a clump of hair and twist it in opposite directions, it should be approximately the same diameter as the eye of the hook. And you'll notice that this hair is too thick. We have too much. So we'll just remove part of it very carefully and check again and see that's much closer to the proper diameter. I think I'll just take a couple more out of here just to be sure it's just right. Okay, now we'll measure the length of the tail. Should be the length of the shank, which is from just behind the eye to the bend. It's a little bit long there. Okay, place it on our hook. Another thing that I always do is I will hold the hair towards me so that then when I do my finger thumb tuck and attach the hair to the shank of the hook, it will roll with the thread torque right back up on top. Now I'm putting on now fairly tight what we call anchor wraps. Those will hold the hair in place. Those anchor wraps, if you'll notice, will cause the hair to flare. And we don't want our tail flared. So what we do is we come back towards the tail. We start putting in subsequently looser wraps, and those are called holding wraps. And that will keep the tail from flaring on you. There, now we have a nice tail. We've got a wild hair, that happens sometimes, just get rid of it. This is a good time to get rid of it. I always cut the hair, trim the hair coming from the back side. And if that hair is at approximately a 45-degree angle or a little higher maybe, loosely up against my scissors and clip, you get kind of a horseshoe shape, and it makes the body a lot smoother there now when I wrap it down. You don't have quite such a great hump right there. This is poly yarn, and for a 14, I'm going to use the whole piece of yarn. Now, if I were doing an 18 or a 20, I'd want to tease some of this out and use a smaller portion. But for a 14, this works pretty good. We're just going to tie this on here. Now, as you can see, I'm already crowding up to that 1/3 point. So I'm going to try to get this back as far as I can. Work my way over it. Now, the thread is also going to be the body color. So one of the things to do to make that look real nice is to counter twist your thread so it's nice and flat. We'll just come back here and do a smooth, nice body, avoiding the tip of the hook or the hook point. Back to the bend. And we're going to smooth. We need to counter rotate a little bit more here so we get it nice and smooth. If you're tying a larger fly, you can use floss. That will work fine. Now, it's much easier to put the hump over with this poly than it is with regular hair. We don't have to push and work it. We can just pull it forward, hold it in place. If you think your yarn is going down too far over, you can take a couple of wraps like this, then hold the yarn up, and then pull it in place. Whoops, we broke our thread. I think I've got some thread here that's a little old, but we can finish it up. The secret when you break your thread is how well you recover. We tie many flies in a year, and a day doesn't go by that you don't break your thread when you're tying on the hackle or something. So just, if you're afraid that it's going to come loose, you can take a hackle pliers and put on it, hold it in place. Now all you want to do is just quickly wrap over it, and you're back in business. Okay, now we'll go ahead and put this hump on. Couple wraps. Just like I was using here now, I'm going to tie a cone of thread in front. And at this point, remember that you want the height of your wings to be about the length of the shank, so we can measure it. And we'll want to trim off right about there. Now the fish really don't care if we divide these wings. So at this point, you could go ahead and put your hackle in. But it's kind of, I think they look kind of cute with the divided wings, so we'll just tip our vise a little bit this way. We're going to go between them. I'm going to pull this over and come back this way. Now we want to take some wraps up the wing, back down. And we're going to hold this wing in place by bringing our thread back under. I can pull that wing clear back at an angle by doing this if I want to, but I really want it just standing about upright. Now I'm going to come back and do the wing closest to me the same way. Several wraps, bring it back around, and see there again, I could lay it clear back on itself. So just adjust it. And there we have our divided wings. The last thing is the hackle. You want to take your hackle and clear off a piece of stem to tie it on with, and I just use my fingers to do that. Take some wraps here and attach it. I'm going to trim it off so that it won't get in the eye. And we want to kind of smooth this out here, so we'll Have a nice place to wrap our hackle. I try to take about 3 or 4 wraps behind. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and about 3 or 4 in front. 1, 2. I think today we're going to go with 3. That looks pretty good. Tie off this hackle. A couple wraps. Trim it. Now I'll use my whip finish tool. Lots of times on a smaller fly, we'll just use a half hitch tool and put a couple of wraps on to make a whip finish, but today this is big enough. Trim it. And now you have Polly Humpy.
Okay, all right, the fly I'm going to be tying is going to be an extended body green drake. This uses a foam body, and the foam body was originated by Richard Bunsey. I like to give him credit for it because it was a big help for me. And I'm going to show you some of my techniques for tying this fly and how to get your dyes on there and how to get the dye to stay on the material. Excuse me. And so we're going to just go right ahead and tie this guy if you're all ready. Material we're going to be using is the foam body. This is a material that you can pick up at basically any furniture store. Just go in and ask them for the materials that they use to protect tabletops and foam, and they'll give this stuff to you in great big sheets. And the pen that I use for this, I use olive on this particular one because this is a green drake. And I tie this fly in yellow, and I tie it in gray, and I tie it in brown. And the yellow drake that I tie is a great big long guy. The body is about that long, tied on a very large hook. So we'll just go right ahead and start the body on this thing. And start the body, hope this doesn't glare on you guys too much. We're going to use just a basic needle, and we're going to put it in the vise instead of the hook. So let's take the fly out, put the needle in, and we're going to use yellow 3/0 thread. And we're going to use this to build the body. If you use a thread that's any finer than this, it tends to cut the foam too bad, so we don't want to do that. So just wrap it on, and you don't want to wrap it on too tight or you'll never get it off. Clip it off. Now, as you can see, I've cut this with a bevel here on each side. And you can split it. If you want it to go deeper into over the hook, you can put a split in. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this has been cut part way through, not all the way through. And you just lay it against the hook, hold it with your finger so it stays on there like that, and then take 2 soft wraps with your thread and then just snug it up a little bit. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. The tails, I like to use microfibettes, and that's this guy right here. You come in a sheet and you can tie an awful lot of flies with this. And we tie this, we pull out a couple of these guys, and I don't know if they can see that or not. Can you see that better with my hand in the back of it? Okay, and what we do is we take 2 of these guys, make sure they're lined up, and on the side facing you, we take a soft loop over it, no pressure on it, and just pull it in. And then we come around and we take about 3 turns, and we fold this over. If you can see that or not, but we fold it over, take a soft loop, and then we snug it up. So now we got a nice, neat little segment there. Come back around, catch the butts of the wing here, or tail there. Come around and make a nice little segment here. And we come around twice. We want 3 segments, so we're going to make 3 of these guys. Come around here, make sure we catch our tails, our wing butts again, or tail butts, and then we come over, and we're going to make 2 loops. We go over it twice and snug it up. Now, we don't want to snug it too tight, otherwise we'll cut this material. It cuts real easy. Take a half hitch in it, just a simple half hitch, clip it off, and then just slide it off the hook. Now you can see we got a nice three little segments on here. We got a little butt here where we're going to get rid of that, and I'm going to show that to you towards the end of the fly. And we got a nice segment, and by darkening the edges of this material with the pen after it's been cut out, you see we get a real nice deep dark back, and we get a lighter colored bottom on this, and the flies are very light colored on the bottom, and they're dark on top. And we also have a nice little curvature to it. Take that out, set this guy down here. Okay. The hook we're going to use is that I use is a 921 Tiemco. It's a 2 extra short shank hook. The other hook that you can use for this is a Mustad 94838. It is also a 2 extra short hook. It's a shorter shank than a standard dry fly hook. What we do is we're going to put our thread on the hook. We cover the whole shank of the hook with thread, and then come back to just not quite a little beyond the middle. The material we're going to use for the wing is white calf body hair, and we're going to cut out a clump of that. Get out here. I'm going to lean over here. I don't want to make a mess of the table. And then we're going to stack it. When we stack it, we get a nice, neat, even little tips on there. And we're going to measure our wing. Now, with dry flies, your wing is normally the length of the shank of the hook, but we're using a 2 extra short hook. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make our wing just a shade longer. I don't like to make it too long, so we're going to make it about a half again as long as this hook. So we're going to come here, and we're going to come up. We're going to take a loop of thread around the wing. Then we're going to push it down. And we're going to tie her down, nice and firm. We're going to really tie it down. I want that guy tied in because calf hair is very slick and it can pull out on you. And we're going to pull her up, and we're going to stand her up. And we're going to take several wraps in front. And we're going to keep right there until we get her sticking straight up in the air. Now, you can post this wing by going around, because this is a parachute pattern, by going around and around. And you can make it. It's kind of a pain. But if you've got a rotary vise, you can come right on around and really work this guy up good. Go right up the wing. Oop, that's another problem you have. Just keep going real nice and sort of loose. Then you can stand her up. Then we're going to, it happens to all of us. Come here. Never happens when you're doing it on the bench. It always happens when you're trying to show it off. Come here. There we go. Now we got her. But we want to post this nice and firm. We want a fairly firm post on this so that we got a nice area to build up our hackle on. And we wind our thread to the back just above the barb. I like it, as you can see, it's right above the barb. And we take it here, just grab the wing in the front of the hook, hold it like so, and then we take this and we drive the point right in, straight down and into the last segment we drew. And you can see it comes out of the segment. Put her back in a vise, make sure she's in there secure. And we bring her around and we take a soft turn, real soft, just one turn. If you put it too tight, it'll put a girdle in there and it'll give it a funny looking waist. And we come on around with it, wrap it to the base of the wing, and we go over it twice. We want 2 nice soft wraps. See, well, we're getting a nice segment in there. And we come around right in front of the wing, bring it back up again, and we take 2 more nice wraps. And we come over, we pull the material back out of the way. And what I use is, I love dyed grizzly. In fact, I've just about shifted over to all my tying to grizzly that's been dyed various colors. I like the effect that you have. With the color, you get a nice fine stem on it, and you get a beautiful leggy pattern out of it when you use the barred colors. So this is a chartreuse, and this is a fairly large fly, so I'll take my feather out around the butt area. We'll just pop one out. There we go. And we're going to strip it out, and you see we get nice shape in our barbules there. And we just strip some off of the butt. Now we tie it in. There we go. About 3 or 4 wraps there, and we clip our butt off. And we're going to wrap this right up. We want to get up to the top of the post in 2 wraps, and then we're going to wrap down through it. Now this is a lock, and it'll lock this all together. And how many turns you take on that is up to you. You can tie this with 6, or you can tie it with 4, or 8 or 10 wraps. It depends on how much hackle you want. Then you hook onto it with your hackle pliers. Just layer right over the hook, pull back all these barbs, take and bring it over, bring this up and be very gentle right here, because a lot of times you'll break the hackle stem, and then you'll have to tie in a new hackle. Then come up here, tie about 2 or 3 nice wraps. Always pull whatever you're going to cut off back and take 2 wraps in front of it. Now you can hold it up and cut it off, get it out of the way. Now we're going to pull this all back. We're going to come here, and you can see I got a few little flyers there, so I can remedy that by just simply trimming them out. Now at this point, I'm going to bring this material up. We're going to finish off, and this is going to make a neat little tiny head on here. We're going to come on, and you can see I took about 3 wraps there. But I'm going to wrap this down fairly tight now, and I'm going to keep wrapping, and hopefully this will cut itself off. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. I'm going to go finish off with my fingers here because I didn't bring a bobbin threader with me. Usually this will break itself off, but if it doesn't, I hate this when this happens. You know, we'll pull this under. We got her here. Let's get this guy out of the way. We're going to clip these butts off here. And I'm going to clip this guy here. Now, just take this and give it a little tug. We all break thread. I normally keep 2 bobbins of this going too. Let's go back at this again here. Broke my thread off, so I'm just going to take and wrap this guy on here like so. We finished off a neat little head. Tight this, make sure you don't cut your thread. Then you half hitch. I'm going to do a whip finish once. Oh, come on. Let's get started here once. There we go. Twice. 3 times. Bring it here. Pull it back. We're going to clip our thread off. Stand our wing up. Take our fingernail now, and we're going to push this guy back just a little bit. Gives us a nice, clean, clear eye. And you can see we've got a neat little hackle there. You see we've got a beautifully segmented body. Nice wing. It's very visible. At this point, we're going to take and drop some head cement there. Ooh. When this thing thaws out from being wet, it leaks a lot. Okay. Now, we're going to take and we're going to cut. Can you see that all right? We're going to cut that little knot off. Got to be very careful at this point. You don't cut your tails off. You can see we've taken the knot off. Now we take the 2 tails, spread them apart, and we give them just a little pull. Like that. And you can see now they're separated. They're up there. They're really nice. And there you got your little green drake, such as it is, even with all the mistakes in it. Even professionals make boo-boos. Now the material that I use, as I said, is the foam. It's this foam material. And I color it with marking pins, permanent marking pins that I use. I color with olive, as I said, brown, yellow, and gray. But if you just color it with a pen, the material tends to come off on your fingers. You see there's a little bit come off my fingers, but not much. I coat it, after I color it, a whole sheet, I coat it with a material called Dave's Fleximent. I'd mix Fleximent 3 to 1, 3 parts of lacquer thinner to 1 part of Fleximent. And just coat this gently with a cotton swab so that you don't wash off all the ink. And you let it dry and it stays flexible. As you can see, it doesn't crack, it doesn't crumble, and it'll stay on there forever. And if you can't find Dave's Fleximent, take shoe goo and open a tube of shoe goo and you get about a piece about 4 to 5 inches long and put it in a baby food jar. Fill the baby food jar almost full of lacquer thinner, shake it up, and you've got exactly the same material, or almost exactly the same as Fleximent, and it'll stay nice and flexible and soft. And you can coat your wing materials for wing cases and for tying quill wings and everything else with the same material, and it stays very nice, and your feathers don't fall apart on you. So that's about it. And there you go. You got yourself a neat little green drake.
My name is John Patton. I'm over here from Idaho Falls. And the pattern I'm going to tie is a very simple thorax done. You can tie them in an Adams, you can tie them in a PMD, they can be tied in a blue-winged olive for a very, very effective Betis pattern. But on the South Fork of the Snake, especially fishing during the summer and the scum lines especially, this is a very effective fly, and the beauty of it is it can be tailored to either high or low water. It's just a thorax done. The concept behind the fly is simply compared to a traditional dry, is to have the wing move back a bit farther than the hackle palm and the body dub throughout the entire fly, with the hackle palmered a much greater distance fore and aft of the fly itself, of the wing itself. And with that, I'll just get to tying it. Okay. And the hooks I prefer are standard Daiichi 1180 or 1190. It's a size 16. And I'm using an 8/0 thread, standard uni thread in an iron gray. Starting at the head, simply dub back or wrap your thread back to about the halfway point, and then bring it back to about where you'd like the wing to be. Clip off your thread. For the wing, it'll be a simple Antron wing, just standard material. One of the tricks in doing this, though, is you tie smaller or bigger sizes to tailor the amount of the Antron to the size of the fly. This amount right here is really very good for tying a size 16 or an 18. As you get to larger sizes, you need to add more Antron. When you go smaller, you need to take some out. To put the wing on, simply wrap around the bobbin and around the thread and slide it up on top of the hook. Once you've done that, you can just notice you can pick it up, move the wing wherever you'd like it to be. Setting it right about there, which is about the 1/3 back from the eye. One more good tight wrap on top, a couple of good wraps behind and in front, and then just like you drop a parachute post, spiral up, but not quite as far. A couple more wraps, and there's your wing. It's a bit long, so I'll just clip it off for now. Standing up straight, out of the way very nicely. Wrap to the back of the fly, lay a thread base for your tail, spiral it back to just behind the wing. Okay. For the tail, I'm going to use simple moose body. It's just this, in tradition with the Adams, and I just like the look of it. And when you make your tail, you don't want to use a lot. Most people seem to tend to over-tail and over-wing their flies. Clip off a small amount. Use your hair stacker. And for some reason, I've always put mine in backwards what everybody else does, but it goes in easier for me. Okay. Oops, lost it. Still just enough tail. That's the beauty of starting with too many fibers. Okay. Catching that just like that. Okay. There's your tail. Very simply. Hold it to the hook so that you can get the length of the shank for the tail just like that. When I grab it here, I have the amount I want for the tail trapped in my fingers. I can now just place that against the hook, and that's where I want the tail to begin, for the thread to end coming back. I can just take my scissors, slide up and along, slide back, and trim off this one right behind the wing. Now then, take one gentle turn up on top, one more, and cinch it down good and tight. And now I've got the tail material trapped on top of the hook, good and tight. Holding the whole thing and pulling back toward me and up slightly, I can spiral back very gently so I don't crush the moose, and keep it on top of the hook. Coming back to here, we're in good shape. There's your tail. It's not flared too badly. Take your thread back to where I want my hackle to start. The hackle I'm going to use are basically Hoffman saddles, grizzly and very nice brown. And I've already taken 2 of them out to simplify things. And I like to get tricky sometimes and actually tie in these 2 guys at the same time. And the technique I learned to do this, learned this from Royce Dam a couple of years ago, and I think it's really slick. You strip so you have your bare hackle points like that, or hackle tips like that, points I mean. And the thread is just where I want that hackle to start. So I hold the hackle at right angles and the barbules just like I want them to be if I was going to wrap them on. Go wrap in front with 1 wrap, and move forward a bit. Where's the guitar? Yeah, there we go. And then I come behind with 1 wrap. Now the beauty of this is, as I start to wrap forward now, those hackle points should just wrap up and lay right along the hook shank. There's no effort, there's no trimming. I can just put a couple of wraps up in front and come right back, and I've laid a very nice base for my dubbing. Wrap the thread back almost to the back end of the hook. The dubbing I'm using is made by Everfloat. It's like the old Spectrum. It's just nice iron gray or an iron dun, and it just dubs very, very nicely. Okay. Put it over here. Take a small piece of it. Wipe my fingers. Spread it out nicely. Just spiral it right up into here. Get it on there real well. Slide it up toward the back of the fly. Then just wrap back gently. So the dubbing starts right where you want, and then begin to bring it forward. Like this. And again, the concept of the thorax fly is that the dubbing is all put on in 1 shot from one end of the fly to the other. You can just wrap around the thorax, around the wing post, to get the thorax to fill in nicely. That's probably a bit too much. Tight. I'm getting nervous. All right, good. Okay. All right, now we're all set and ready to wrap the hackle, or wind the hackle. Take the grizzly first. Let me get this little piece of wing out of the way. Actually break it out a bit. Better guide. All right. And with the rotary vise, you can do this very easily. About 3 wraps behind the wing, and then about 3 wraps in front. Now, when you go to tie your hackle off, pull the hackle forward and out at a slight angle. And you can bring your thread over, around it, being careful to go between the hackle and the hackle you've already put on this, and just let it drop down. By doing that and holding it firmly, you tend to tie it off much further back on the fly. Trim that off. All right. Just trim the extra fibers out of the way. And to be safe, throw in a half inch to avoid if you have an accident. All right, good. And now run the brown hackle, much the same way, wiggling it back and forth. Again, catch it good and tight. Couple of wraps. The way it's supposed to be done is you then pull it back completely back out of the way, put a couple of wraps in front of it, pull down on your thread, and it should just break off. Do that on it. No, I guess it's not. Okay. Put finish behind. A couple of half hitches. Okay. Flip finish. Nice and clean. Use the edge of your scissor to cut the material just like that. Turn the wing of the fly like so, and clip off the wing about the length of the shank up the hook, just like that. The remaining step is to trim the hackle right even with the point of the hook. Basically, that's it. This is fairly heavily hackled, and I probably put on a little bit too much. But for heavy water, this will work extremely well. And then as you move to lighter or more slower flows, you can back on the amount of hackle. I think that does it.
The pattern I'm going to tie right here is the caddis humpy. It's a pattern that I discovered. I had inspiration at 3 o'clock in the morning one morning, and I had been trying to figure out how to tie a pattern that I thought would float well and be durable. And I was fortunate enough to come up with an idea at 3 in the morning, and immediately proceeded to my fly tying room and worked on the pattern that I had the inspiration for. And what I'd like to do is show you how to tie this particular pattern. The materials I'll be using will be a bleached deer hair or an elk hair. I prefer deer hair because I like to deal with that material a little bit better. It's a little more flexible and supple. It makes a great tail, and I use it to represent, really, there's not a tail on a caddis. It's really mainly to represent a trailing shuck. And you can also substitute light Zelon to go ahead and represent the trailing shuck on the caddis. The body and the overback will be regular deer hair. For the smaller patterns, I prefer a coastal deer hair. I generally like to use a gray colored material, the medium gray instead of the darker or the lighter. But depending on the caddis pattern that you're trying to imitate, you could go with the gray or the lighter, even some of the dyed colors. The body itself is made out of the thread that I happen to use, so you choose your thread to match the color of the caddis that you're intending to imitate. In this case, I'm going to use an olive thread. The thorax material is peacock, the standard peacock material that is so popular with many flies and does so well. The hackle that I'll run through the palmer through the thorax will be a grizzly hackle, your standard, and I like to use saddle hackles because their stems are thinner and they're longer and easier to deal with. I'll start out by, I do use a gold rib wire for the ribbing on the abdomen. I'm going to go ahead and I'll start out with tying in the tail first. one of the tricks of this particular pattern is to make sure you use enough material, but not so much that the body gets too bulky, but enough to represent the silhouette that you're trying to create. Better get the thread on the hook first. I usually start in the center. In this case, I'm using a Tiemco 100 hook. I like to use the chemically sharpened hooks because of their ability to set the hook into the fish. The tail itself, what we call the tail, which is really the trailing shuck, is not very long. It's just maybe a quarter the length of the shank of the hook. And you tie that material in and give it 2 or 3 good turns of thread to cinch it down on top of the hook. Then bring your thread up about midpoint in the shank of the hook. And now we're going to put in the overback for the abdomen, which is the deer hair. And it's good when you get this. I've selected a piece of fur here, or hair here, that has very little furry undercovering. It's good to go ahead and make sure you take out any short furry underparts that you may have in the hair, and then we'll tap the hair down to even up the ends. One thing we need to do is try to get hair that is approximately 2.5 times the length of the shank of the hook, because we're going to run this hair backwards and then forward and then back again. So we need to have a considerable length of hair in there. I'll cut off all the ends evenly, and I put those in the center of the hook shank and lightly loop around the hair, and then begin tying towards the back, holding that hair up so that the hair stays on top of the hook. Don't need to cinch it down real hard at this point, because keeping some of that buoyancy of that deer hair underneath of the thread adds to the floatability of this pattern. At this point, I also tie in my fine gold wire that'll be used to rib this portion of the fly. I tend to tie it on the near side to me, and then I go to the back one more time with my thread. And at this point, I take my thread and I just taper the body nicely, making sure that there's no big gaps or valleys in the body. Now I gather up the long hair that represents the shell back, and I bring all these together and I pull them in a nice, comfortable clump and lay them right on top of the hook, bringing my thread over and cinching it down so that I have a nice smooth overback. I can pull up on it to make sure that the sides are pulled up and cinched up tight. I use a rotary vise. It makes it very nice to be able to turn around and look and see if I have any items that need to be corrected, like a hair that may have busted off in the process. At this point, I rib the overback with my gold wire. This accomplishes a couple of things for me. It cinches down the hair a little bit more. It provides the segmentation that one typically sees in the insect bodies, and it takes those hairs on the back, which are slightly fragile, and makes them, it reinforces them, so when the fish hit that particular bug, it'll maintain its durability a little bit longer. Now I grab the hair and I keep it up above the shank of the hook, and I take loose wraps forward to get that hair tied down for the thorax. At this point, I go back to the middle of the body and back and forth over where the thorax will be in the fly. I now take my selected hackle. In this case, I'm going to use a grizzly hackle because I like the light pattern that it breaks and does on the fly. And I'm using a saddle here. I'm going to go up far enough that I get the right size hackle that I want. The legs on a caddisfly are relatively prominent, so you want to utilize that feature in your fly. Now I've tied in my hackle. I now take my peacock that I've selected, and I like to use the eye of the peacock rather than the bundled peacock that you can often buy in clumps that's sewn, because you have a chance to pick the better pieces, and they seem to provide a nicer hurl to use for tying your patterns down. I now commence to wrapping the peacock thorax, and this looks pretty bushy right at this point because I've selected a really good piece of peacock hurl. But as I palmer through it and I go back and forth with my thread, it will tend to push some of that hurl down, and so it's good to have the bushy hurl in there. Now I palmer my hackle through the thorax, my grizzly hackle that I tied in earlier, and I get it up to just behind where the hair is, and I tie down the hackle. Don't use too many turns. About 3 ought to be enough because you're going to run your thread back through the hackle anyway, and that'll provide further strength to the tie down. Now this is a tricky thing that I don't see done much, but you basically are going to run your thread back to the midsection, and you're going to run it through that hackle and through the peacock curl that you've tied down. And you can do it without tying down the fibers from your hackle, just by kind of dancing it through and moving the hackle all the way back to the midsection. Now the last final step is to gather up all that hair that was sticking out front of the hook and pull it to the back of the hook now in a cluster on top, and tie down 3 or 4 turns, maybe 5, in the center. And at this point, this can be a little tricky too. You can do half hitches. I prefer to do a whip finish that I do with my fingers. It would be hard to do this whip finish with the whip finish tool. So a half hitch may be, if you're used to using a tool, the half hitch may be a better alternative for you. Clip off the thread. Now, one of the great inventions of fly tying is a pair of scissors. Everything that didn't do what you want it to, you can now go in and cut it off. You learn the skills of a surgeon, you can be a fly tyer. Another option you have when you're done with this pattern at this point is to go in underneath, and if you're going to fish it in spring creeks or slower water where the fish are a little more selective and you want your pattern to be able to sit down in to the film of the water and have your fly sit down, at this point you can cut a V out from the hackle right under the thorax. If you're going to fish pocket water and water where you need a little additional buoyancy, leave the hackle in there full. This technique can also be used for tying stoneflies and hopper patterns and and you can use different colors and accomplish a lot of different things. If you take after you've tied all your fly, if you take and soak it in a material like you can make at home, you can use xylene or acetone and some silicone or mucilin is a better material, and melt a little bit of it in the silicone and dip the fly in that, or you can use commercial products like Loon makes a product called Hydrostop, and Orvis sells something called New Fly. Soak all your flies ahead of time. These flies will float like corks for at least 8 or 9 fish until you get enough, the fish have torn them up enough, and so they're pretty resilient. Good luck on catching fish with this fly.
My name is Mark Hoser. I'm from Stockton, California. The fly that I'm going to be tying in the vise is the extended body Henry Forks salmon fly. I'll go over the materials. Take the fly out of the vise. Be tying an extended body, which the extension of the body will be a 25 thousandths hard monofilament tippet material. The hook that I'm going to be using will be the Tiemco 5263 size 8. The tail of the fly is going to be a natural moose body hair. And then the body material is going to be 2 strands of yarn. One is an orange Molon yarn, which is the fuzzier of the two, and then the smaller size is a black buggy nymph yarn. The orange will be under the fly and the black will be on the top of the back of the fly. The hackle of the fly will be a natural brown saddle. The underwing of the fly will be a iridescent paper ribbon material generally used in the craft industry to tie bows, large bows. I'll cut this down in the shape of a salmon fly or stone fly type wing. The overwing will be a natural brown elk hair. And then the head of the fly will be a black cow elk hair. And then to finish off the fly, I'll use a black and electric blue rubber legs. Electric blue is in the speckles on the rubber legs themselves. The thread that I'm going to be using is a 6/0 uni thread in a fire orange color. First, apply the thread above the point of the hook. Secure the thread. Cut away the tag of the thread, wrap it back to above the point, and then forward to about 2/3 the shank length, and I'll leave the front third of the shank length bare in the front where the head will be applied. Stop the thread at that position. We'll cut off about 30 to 40 hairs of the moose body hair. Put them into a stacker, even up the tips. Gauge the length. Whoops, I need to stop right there. I need to apply the extended body material first, which is the tippet material. Cut off a short length of the monofilament and take a pair of flat, smooth jaw pliers and flatten the length of the monofilament that will be contacting the shank of the hook. Lay that right on top the hook shank, right where our thread is ending, And we'll secure that right on top of the shank, right back to above the hook barb. And the extended body will equal approximately the shank length, which is from where the bend begins to where the eye begins. And we'll cut that off. And we'll take our moose hair, which has been stacked in a stacker to even up the tips, gauge the length. The tail will extend approximately the distance of the gape past the extended body. Gauge that, hold it on top of the shank, cut the butt sections out where it's going to begin where the head will be tied in. Take our thread forward. Wrap lightly. Take one wrap around lightly. The next wrap will be tighter, and another wrap even tighter. One more, and then we'll begin securing down the tail on top of the material on the shank with nice evenly spaced wraps. Continuing back on the shank, when you get to where the bend is, you'll take your thread, pass it over and under the material, and continue the spiral wraps back. All the way back to where the monofilament ends on the underbody. The moose hair gives the body bulk for the underbody. You can also tie these in smaller versions and use less hair, which will give you a much smaller profile. And then once you get to the end, wrap the thread forward in spiral wraps. And continue forward. Then we'll take our body material. The orange, which will be on the underbody, will be on the far side of the shank. The black, which will be on the top part of the body, will be on my side or the near side of the shank. Secure that into place, the orange first, and the black on my side. And then spiral wrap that back, all the way back to the end of the tail, where the underbody is of the monofilament, keeping the orange thread on the opposite side and the black on the near side. Again, just the way we tied in the tail, we'll tie in the yarn body material, passing the bobbin under the tail. This is a woven body technique which has been around for 15 to 20 years, I believe. And then we'll take a couple of wraps right at the end, make sure the yarn is secured at that position. And then take the the thread forward. And we'll take that down to the bare shank and leave that hanging in the front. Then I'll turn the vise towards me so the point or the eye of the hook is facing me. I'm going to use a little crochet hook to help me tie my overhand knots, which will become the woven body. First, taking a loop of the orange under the body. The hook, the crochet hook is in the upright position, past the black under the orange. Reach over with the hook, wrap it around the hook, and pull it through the orange loop. And then we tighten down the overhand knot. So that we now have black on top, orange on the bottom. We'll continue on where the orange is on the opposite side now. Take the hook, pass it down with the black on top, make a loop around it. Take the orange over the black, around the hook, and pull it through. Continue with this process. The orange under, black on top, tightening that down. It makes a real tight, secure body. The yarn gives it the buggy appearance. The advantage to the woven body is that you can, extended bodies, that you can use a much smaller hook, which will give you a lighter dry fly, which will float a lot longer than a standard stone fly, which is tied on a size 4 hook, which is a much larger wire diameter than the size 8. Okay. Continue with these knots all the way down to the front of the body. You can also do this without a crochet hook, but you have to remove your thread from the fly and just tie your overhand knot, pass it over the front of the eye. This makes it a little bit easier to secure your material down without removing your thread from the fly. You can also apply a float into the yarn to keep it floating a lot higher and drier than if it's just a fly that's tied on the shank. Once we get off the extension of the body, then we'll tie in our hackle. One more wrap under the body on the extension, and then we'll be on the shank. Okay, we'll take one wrap. It'll be on top of the hook shank itself before we tie in the hackle. Okay, we'll take a brown saddle hackle. Splay out the fibers and cut the fibers on the shank. Don't rip them, but cut them off. Back our thread off. Instead of wrapping more thread on, we'll just back it off. Tying the hackle on the far side of the shank by the tip that you removed. Wrap the thread back forward and continue on with the yarn. With this woven body technique, you can vary the colorations of your body and actually apply more than 2 sections of yarn on it at a time and get a multiple colored body. Try that again. For this size fly, about 16 inches of yarn is needed to finish the body off completely. Okay, once we get down to the end, take the yarn, wrap it twice around the front on the bare shank, 2 or 3 securing wraps, and remove each section of yarn. And we can take our hackle feather and wrap forward, nice evenly spaced turns. You don't need a lot of hackle. On about 5 wraps, 4 or 5 wraps will do it. Secure the hackle with 2 wraps and remove the remaining hackle. And we'll take our scissors and trim the top of the hackle at a nice slant where our wing will be applied, and come to the underside and trim the bottom hackle so that it's basically even with the height of the gape. We'll come in with our under wing, which I've cut in the shape of a stonefly wing. Apply that right to the top of the shank so that it extends approximately the length of the body. Take our natural brown elk hair, and take about, just roughly estimating, about 20 to 25 hair fibers. Take a fine-tooth comb. This comb is a pet flea comb. The teeth are very fine and close together. Remove as much of the underfur from the base of the hair. Place this in a stacker, even the tips. Remove any short hairs that won't make the length of the wing. We'll end up pulling out anyway, so might as well just remove them now. Gauge the length of the wing on top of the body. The wing, over wing will extend to the tip of the tail. Remove some more of the hair. That's a little bit too big for this wing. All right. Take the thread about halfway between the body and the eye of the hook. Lay the wing on top. Cut the butt sections out. A soft loop around. Second one will be tighter. Third even tighter. And spiral the thread back like we did the tail. Secure that in place, and then one more soft loop. Not tightening it down real tight because it'll end up splaying the wing out too far. And wrap the thread back forward. And I'll have to remove some of the more of the butt hairs in the front. Secure those down tightly. And we'll take our black cow elk hair. Again, cleaning out the underfur. Removing the underfur helps the hair to flare evenly. The underfur, if it's tightened down with a thread, will bind the hair down so that it cannot flare evenly. Even up the tips. Now we're going to remove this with the tips pointing to the right. Gauge the length of the wing. The head, actually the collar, will extend approximately half the distance of the wing. from the eye. So gauge that distance, switch the hair to the other hand, take one soft loop around. Another, we're tying in right behind the eye of the hook. And the third loop we'll take and we'll spin the hair around so that it completely spins around the shank. Tighten it down, one more turn, one other turn. Now we'll have to pull the hair tips forward, pull the butt sections back, and then secure the butt sections back to the wing where the wing was tied in. Take our scissors and cut out the remaining hair in the butt section of the wing. It's easily distinguished from the black from the natural in the butt sections of the wing. Some more tightening wraps to reduce the diameter of the head. Now we'll leave our thread back to where our wing was tied in. We'll form our bullet head. Pushing the hair back away from the eye. Now there are several bullet head type tools. This is the Faust tool, bullet head tool. This is the Griffin type tool, but for this size head, these tools are adequate, but you'll need a much larger, and what I just use is a surgical type tubing type material, cut to about a 1-inch length. Just place that and push that over the head. Run that back to where the thread is. Take the thread, soft loop, third loop will be tighter, third even tighter, a few more. Now we'll take the bullet head tool and slowly pull it off of the head. And then take a few more wraps. What we want to do is build a slight collar back where the head is, where the actual head is tied in place. And then we'll take our rubber leg material, cut off 2 sections. We'll just be using the black. It has a purple accent on the tips of these, but we're just concerned about the black. Take the leg material, lay it over the thread so it's basically evenly placed. Run the thread up, wrap it over the head, and then with 2 light securing wraps, and take one leg and place it on the opposite side. So they're nice and evenly placed along the sides of the body and the head. And then tie in several more securing wraps. Then we'll whip finish off the thread. With approximately 6 whip finish wraps. Tighten down the thread and remove the thread. And we'll turn the fly over in the vise and remove the hair from the underside of the body. And then we'll take and cut our legs to the desired length, which will be approximately to the length of the collar on the head. That's it.